Beautiful people, here we are. Let's go over a proposal. Obviously, a cover page. We'll talk about that in a moment. You have a table of contents page. We've looked at that before in a sample, but basically, all the pages need to line up properly on the right hand side. Just it can't be goofy looking. So it's that little dotted line between the actual subheading and the page number that is flush right. We'll look at that as well in a moment, but let's talk a little bit more in depth about the main sections of the proposal. First of all, the introduction. As you guys know, it's about a page in length. The main thing that starts out with is an announcement of the who, what, where, when, and not the why. So we're holding back. We're just simply identifying the topic. So here's an example. For the past 18 months, the Satellite Products Laboratory has been developing a system that will permit companies with large nationwide fleets of trucks to communicate directly to their drivers through a satellite link. So here you can see basically you've got the timeline, the past 18 months, that's your win, and then we've got the Satellite Products Laboratory, your subject, and what are they doing, right? Developing the system. So you want to identify your key players, you want to identify your key subject, and you want to identify basically the timeline you've conducted your study in. It's then that you're ready to cover the why. I basically like to hold back personally on a proposal to kind of make sure this stands out. It's equivalent to a thesis statement that anchors a good paragraph as an introduction to a typical basic academic essay. Here you want to define the issue and frame it as a problem that can be solved. And as we know, we want to emphasize cost and consequence. And to do so, we want to state the belief your solution challenges. So, in other words, you've got to work backwards. Let's say, for example, you are proposing that everybody bring a mug to different cafes on Syracuse University and get a discount for filling up with the coffee. That's your solution. And the belief that your solution is challenging is that this would be too much of a loss in income or too arduous for the cafe workers to deal with. The second is to specify the conflict. What's the gap? So the gap here obviously would be that there's a misunderstanding, perhaps of cost, of what it really involves in terms of labor and time and money. The third is again to emphasize and punch the consequence. If we keep going the route we're going, we're losing what? What are we losing? Maybe we're losing environmental consciousness. Maybe we're losing a competitive edge with other companies, other universities that are pushing that lug to mug ethic. And then we pull it into solution. Again, a therefore statement. We've been through this before, but the main thing is to emphasize cost in terms of labor that could be saved, time that could be saved, money that could be saved, or health. And sometimes you can imply also status because you are addressing this document to a stakeholder. It may, in some ways, enhance that person's status and power. The main thing here is that we're clear by about paragraph 2 of the objective of the report. You're setting yourself up a problem, a solution with a therefore statement. And again, you don't have to use that exact word, but that logic. And then what is the objective or goal of the report? And there can be multiple goals. I mean, it could be a few questions that you're going to take on. So that sets you up for that introduction. Should be, again, about a page long. The methods section, well, why do it? It lets your readers assess the soundness of your research design. They have to know whether or not it's appropriate for the problem you're investigating. Are you setting up a design that's too wide? Are you asking that Syracuse University do everything, so to speak? provide free mugs, wash them, put bins out every locale and before every building. That might be too much. Might be. Second is to determine the limitations that your method might place on the conclusions you draw. What does that mean? Well, just simply that every method is not going to be able to cover everything. So, for example, if you only have so many survey results from interviews with fellow students, you can't claim as much. You just don't have enough data. Third point is you want them to be able to repeat and or expand your experiment. And I put that in quote marks. I mean, in a sense, what you're doing is a real soft form of experiment in this proposal. You are going to interview a few experts, you are going to survey a few people, and you are going to look at comparative data. The elements of a method section are to name your specific methods and how you did them. In a way, you're arguing, guys, I've thought this through. Reader, I've thought this through. This is why we did a survey. This is how we did a survey. This is why we did an interview. This is how we did the interview. So going through each form of each form of method is important. It establishes your authority, shows that you thought through each part of your research project. Argue a bit for your methods. Again, as I said, why these methods? How are they legitimate? Note your limitations. And this simply is drawing on the previous points. And share procedures of how you found or gathered data so that your research could be duplicated and expanded. All right, guys, now we get into the results. Basically, it's the data that you found from your methods. What are the endpoints? And it's best revealed through tables and graphs. If you can keep your sentences to a minimum, it's helpful. Where do you land those sentences? Well, you land them when you're trying to interpret the data. Now, this section can be combined with the results section, meaning you can have a results and discussion section. But sometimes it's separated, and that's why I've listed as such here. First, define in the report that you are now interpreting the results, and this is where you're doing it. Make sure you anchor your claims in the data and show your argument rather than than state it. So yes, explain your argument. Example, 91% of the data transmissions were successful. There's your claim, and now we're going to show it. These data are reported according to the region in which the trucks were driving. Notice this emphasis here, the most important difference. Okay, and then goes on and on between different regions as to where those rates were better in transmission. And this, by the way, is straight out of our textbook, basically showing how transmission of data online from trucks was helping this company get a better sense of where their supply chain was, how they were able to get goods to their customers. All right, so last but not least, two sections, really, a conclusion that basically defines what your results mean. You had an original research question or series of questions, and then problems that you set out to investigate. So tell us and show us if you met those objectives. State explicitly how the conclusion meets the objectives of your investigation that you stated in the introduction. And sometimes you can actually graph this out. Like you can put together a two-column look to it. You can say here was the original question, and here's the finding, if you will, conclusion. So you can do a split column table if you'd like for this. Recommendations, well, it's a bit step further. It's not just the findings and the ultimate results, but it's not just the interpretation and okay, here's the conclusion, yes, no, and here's the main way the main point, but it's the how of that conclusion. It's explaining how they could take action. And here's where you could rank the actions they can take in order to put into place your proposal. And you can do it by chronology. So, for example, maybe to get that lug the mug thing going, the first thing is to simply lower the price of the mugs on campus. The second is to make sure there's more than just People's Place at SU that gives a discount, and so on and so forth. Pretty much it, guys. I want to look at one example here real quick with y'all, and I'll get you out. All right, so here are going to be parts and pieces of a proposal that works pretty well. So we got an anchoring logo on top. We've got the title in bold, and yes, usually about 14, 16, 18 font, depending on your feel. Here we're going 12-point font. Typical, boring stuff, but important. And you can see that's bolded, prepared by, and prepared for is ubiquitous, meaning that's pretty much cross-platform. Definitely for government documents. And business is not as technical, but it might be. It's just always a good, smart look to it. All your names, and always, always don't miss the opportunity for making sure you get the title right. Notice, there's an additional title here, distinguished. Okay, important. It's not flattery. That's the title of the person. All right, and then down here we anchor with a date. Notice this is, again, in full now, the title of the college. Gives them a little bit more, these guys pressed on it a bit, I think, by saying it was actually generated. Seems to be generated actually by the college itself, but heck, technically you guys are part of the college. Why not flex a little bit? All right, tables of contents. Notice that we've got the same hierarchy, so this size of header is the same as the title, and that's a nice follow through. Okay, and you can follow the Google Docs format for heading. This is basically the same size as heading, size 1, heading 1, under their pull down menus under paragraph styles. Format, paragraph styles, heading 1. And this would be heading 2 and heading 3. And these are these little dots I was talking about, the periods, if you will. All the numbers line up correctly on the right-hand side. And we've gone through this before, but again, the introduction simply gets us an announcement. It anchors us with a proposal, having a firm understanding of the role of these recreational stakeholders play, helps us get good stewardship. And this is going into a hunter safety course, and now it gives us some stats, and then gives us a little bit more with more reporting data from a report that only 11.5 million Americans age 16 or older hunted. Is that a problem? Is it not? They kind of dictate that it is, and they take on caveats or perhaps doubts people would have. It's not to convert students to become hunters. It's to educate and so on. By the way, this course was implemented, and kudos to these guys. Really well done. So then they look slightly at what similar courses have been done, and they somewhat even give a proposal, almost a conclusion here. They show, if you will, they're very smartly positioning their ideas. They don't give the conclusion away, but everything else. Okay, let's look at 2 other sections quickly. You will not have an overview section. You will have methods. So this one's done chronologically. Initial research was, next we contacted. Not a bad way to do it. All right, the next interview conducted, and here's why, and here's what we found out. And again, always giving primacy to your strong sources, knowing that they're often players in making that decision. And then anchoring, lastly, we surveyed. Okay, the criteria will not be part of your production. This is a feasibility report. It's a little more extensive, and I've backed off it, and thank God we did, given what we're going through now. Again, the conclusion, here's what we should do. It advances the mission. It ties to that smartly to make an argument based on the ethos, right, reputation of the institution, and also it's needing to keep up with competition. They combine it with a recommendation right here. Technically, it should have been all together, and then they didn't give specifics here, but it was a good shout out. All right, we're not going to get into appendices right now, but they then had a references section, and then they started getting into appendices, where they not only showed the survey, but explained it. All right, guys, that's it. That's all for now. All right, take care, and we will chat more talking about surveys and interviews in our next lecture.